Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Good morning. Welcome to the Microsoft Online Safety Standards and Procedures Training. I'm Bob Tebow with TWC. I'm a Senior Solution Manager. I've been providing online safety guidance and instruction for nigh on 14 years now here at Microsoft. So today we're going to talk about filtering user-generated names. So to help illustrate this, we're going to go back to a fictional company that we've used before. We call them Litware. They're an online coupon aggregator service. And part of the Litware service for the purpose of this scenario is that they have an online community where people can have conversations, people can respond to them, they can post user-generated content, and share other UGC. And of course, we have information up there on what UGC is. It's user-generated content. It's anything that people can create, pictures, drawings, comments, anything like that. So let's look how we can manage online safety risks, related risks associated with this. So the Litware team has reached out to their online safety manager saying, hey, we're ready for our product review. Oftentimes that person is also their privacy manager, is done in conjunction with it. They explain that they're going to be launching their forum. They're very excited about how they wanted to give users the ability to interact with each other. And they were trying to think about how they could have users identify themselves. They were obviously not wanting to use the real names because of privacy concerns. They also knew they couldn't display the user's email address for the same reasons. And so allowing users to create their own username was agreed upon as being the most desirable solution, the path that the business chose to take. So if you were the privacy or the online safety manager, I keep saying that. If you were the online safety manager, what do you think you would ask as a question? Christy Berry? So are they going to filter the usernames? That's a very good question. Anybody else? Janice, if they're going to allow people to delete their profiles later on, so that would be the privacy, but it would be commingled. It is. These things go together very closely. Kim Howell has one. How long are they going to be? Okay. So some of the questions we came up with is the site providing the service? Is the site providing Microsoft services, one that being operated on behalf of another entity and where their policies apply? The reason why it's important is because if it's for another entity, Microsoft Online Safety Standards may not apply. So someone who's like hosting on Azure, for example. Is the site hosted by a vendor for us, or are we hosting it? This matters because over the many years that I've done this work, it's not uncommon to have a product team go, oh, if we're having a vendor do it, we don't have to worry about policies. All bets are off. And that's not the case. That is not an uncommon misperception. Will the user-generated name be public-facing? And of course, we have what public-facing is. It's clearly available to the public. Online safety filtering requirements will apply. And has the team provided a mechanism for users to report inappropriate usernames? The type of people looking to create shocking or offensive usernames have proven to be creative in their efforts of getting around filtering. This is an understatement. People have come up with amazingly creative ways to use letters and characters to create very offensive names, oftentimes for the purpose of simply creating a very offensive name. You can get a hold of the unapproved terms list, which, while very large, is a very small representation. It is very challenging. It is amazing. I have to admit, I have a couple of friends who seem to enjoy doing that kind of thing a lot. I don't know why. They just like to do it. Microsoft Account deals with this quite a bit. Again, people just trying to come up with something that has a shock value. And so when they allow them to register for an account name, a domain name requiring text filtering of user-requested names against the CFC approved list of disallowed terms. So as I mentioned earlier, the unapproved terms list. That was originally created, I think, at least 10 years ago, and I don't know how many iterations it's gone through, but it is not, I don't believe it's the only list anymore. Teams tend to create iterations of it, so teams will use it as a baseline, and then they will add to it stuff that comes along that's unique to theirs. Yeah, John. No, I don't believe it is. He was asking if it was related to the geopolitical profanity list. I would imagine there's probably quite a few crossover bits, crossover names and stuff, but it's separate. Christy has a question.
Well, I was going to add to that. The geopol list is really a list of terms that we as a company choose to not put in content we generate, right? So that's what the geopol list is for, is content that we generate. This is content that's generated by others. So we might want to restrict ourselves more, but for freedom of expression purposes, we might want to restrict others less. So while there is probably overlap, the lists are different because they're intended for very different purposes.
And this list with the accounts piece has terms on it like billing. So people can't create an account that says billing at live.com or account services at live.com. So there's also words that aren't really naughty or scary or offensive, but that we've decided we don't want to let customers use in creating nicknames or accounts or whatever. It's used for phishing and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's a good point, Christy. Because I was thinking of more along the lines of the obscene, but you're right. There are account names. It's billing. Abuse is usually one that's prohibited. There's also what are some of the other ones? Support, names like that, because people will actually try to create such an account and then they'll use it as an attempt to trick people into believing that they are in fact representatives of Microsoft, oftentimes for the purpose of getting them to divulge their information so that they can wreak havoc. It's kind of the easy way of putting it. So these rules include any Microsoft branded web website hosted by a third party. And then, there's the filtering procedure is basically to, contact TWC, obtain the unapproved terms list, compare user-generated content against the list, and reject inappropriate user names. This can pose to be challenging sometimes because sometimes user-generated, some of the banned content will be a given word, which may in fact appear in the middle of somebody's name, of a legitimate name. And this can create quite a bit of frustration sometimes for the end users. And there is usually an exception process, but the exceptions are not necessarily readily granted. A high bar is kind of set for them. But this is something that your product team should be aware of, that sometimes this can occur just because in the effort to try to prevent people from working their way around these filters. Yes? The microphone?
Specific lists, like market-specific terms that, like, in one market might be okay versus in one market they're not okay, but maybe not doesn't apply in another market?
I think Kim's going to answer that question. She's moving for the microphone.
Today we do not. That is something that we plan to work on. So
that's been a challenge that's been a gap that's been recognized for quite some time. It's just obviously very challenging to do because, especially with the differences in languages and cultures, it can be hard for people who aren't part of that language and culture to understand and appreciate. But there is efforts planned for that. So this was a brief look at how We did this with Litware, how they handle requests. What I'm interested in now is, have any of you who have done online safety had something similar experiences? You know, what did you do? Do you know of others who may have encountered something similar? Oh, Jody wants to share.
So what we're doing in Xbox is we have gamer tags. And if you can imagine, a gamer tag can be pretty long, and our target audience is boys and young to middle-aged men. So they kind of get creative.
Who sometimes have the maturity of boys.
It usually involves body parts or acts that are not always community-friendly. So what we've done to address some of the scale is we actually have a tool that we put out there where when we pull a name and it looks to us like it's offensive, because as you mentioned, I could have a term that's innocuous sitting in the middle of another term. Yep. We've actually put it out so our community can vote on it. They can rate whether that gamer tag is offensive or not. So we have a trusted group of air marshals where they work, and they're a small group that we know who they are, and we vetted them, and we send it out to them as a group to poll, and that gives us that kind of a second look at some of those potentially offensive names, and helps us to build our technology and kind of work that back into our screening service.
That's a great idea. I mean, because I think that also helps address the challenge that we often see, where as the language evolves, and seems to evolve at a much more rapid rate, just thanks to the internet, you see terms that suddenly either are brand new from whole cloth and are offensive, or where a term that has existed for a while has now been morphed into something that a certain subset of people find to be giggle-worthy and offensive to others. So thank you very much. That was great. Does anybody else have anything? Oh, Denise? We'll get a microphone here for you. They put one on me.
One other thing that I've actually found to be true of some groups is that we have some very creative people who actually do figure out a series of numbers that create something upside down, right? Especially for an upside down, or create a series of numbers that spell out something if you were to look at them in a different light. And so that part makes it very, very hard to filter on those things.
Yeah, it is. It's challenging. Like I said, the level of creativity that people invest in trying to create a username that either they feel like they're slipping something through just for the giggles of it, or it's a way to try to be offensive, it's amazing. If they put that much effort into something more productive, they'd rule the world. All right. Oh, and Nicholas has something? That I don't know. It's not. So Nicholas's question was, how often, how easily can we update the inappropriate terms list?
So we actually have a meeting coming up where we've identified various stakeholders who have lists, and we're going to create a process for that. So one of the things that we've realized is that the UTL today hasn't been updated in a while, but we don't have any guiding principles for what should be on it. So we want to set some guiding principles and then have a process by which we recommend new terms, and those are vetted against a certain set of criteria and then updated on a regular basis. So again, trying to balance freedom of expression with the offensive nature of some of these things. But I also want to say what Jody's doing, I think that's great, because we'll never be able to keep up with this stuff. So having community, in a sense, community moderation and community determining what is appropriate and what's not, I think that's really the way to go long term. And it's not something that's required by the standards today, but I applaud that effort, and I want to push that as a best practice, because the unapproved terms list will always be behind, just by that nature. And again, because each forum has a different community, that what's appropriate to them is different, community moderation allows for that variability where an unapproved terms list is always going to be a baseline. So.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a great creative way of doing it. It also provides nice agility to the process, and you know, that's something that sounds like, Denise, for the challenge that you guys are facing, might be something worth considering, because you might be able to leverage your communities. You know, oh, you just know it exists. Okay. Thank you very much. I don't think so. So now we're going to get into codes of conduct, which we've mentioned obviously a couple of times prior to this. So we're going to go back to Litware because of course they've got this online community, and this online community is just ripe with online safety scenarios that we can leverage here. So we're going to talk about, as we talked about the fact that they have the online community, and we're going to see how that can be used to manage relative to online to a code of conduct. So the team in this case is very excited about the launch of their online safety community, of their online community, and from years of experience of working with product teams, I know this to be true. They oftentimes are looking at these things and they're going, "This is just going to be fantastic." They're only seeing nothing but upside. And sadly, sometimes the job of an online safety manager is to come in and go, "This is fantastic. Now let me tell you how somebody's going to abuse it." I know Christy Berry's been there with me in the past doing it. Yeah, it's like you feel sometimes like what's that? You're Debbie Downer. You're the angel of doom, trying to just be rain on their parade. But it's really about trying to helping them understand that the majority of users are going to continue to use their product and service, are going to use it in a great way. It's just that help them understand that there are people who are going to show up. There are people who are going to be doing nothing but trying to cause trouble. And how do you properly address that? How do you be prepared for it? As we've said before, there's just always a number of users, a small number, but it's amazing how much trouble they can cause. It's the same reason why we have chlorinated swimming pools. It's because there's a few people who just can't play nice in them. So from a code of conduct standpoint, what kind of questions do you think you might ask? Jody? Do they allow unauthenticated users? It was easier for you to say than me, but that's a very good question. Anyone else? I think Kim's doing. Oh, Jody, you got another?
Do they have a way for users to report it?
Is there an abuse reporting mechanism? Christy? What type of interactions are there going to be between the users? Jody's got another? Are they doing video or are they doing more of live streaming? Any kind of video or live streaming? You don't want necessarily chat roulette on your service?
So what's your target market?
What's your target market?
Does it include children?
Yeah, this is great.
Is it app developers?
This is great because as a pilot program, there's going to be a whole lot more questions on this next time.
How are they connecting with other social media platforms?
How are they connecting with other social media platforms? Yeah, these are great questions. I only had a couple. Oh, how are they moderating? Yeah. Who's moderating? What kind of information are they allowing users to share? Yeah.
What
kind of parental controls? Okay.
What content are the users of the site expecting to see?
Ah, that's a very good question too. Yeah. All right. So I didn't have any of those. So are they allowing them to upload or publish user-generated content? And a code of conduct must be in place to provide users with guidance around these behaviors. Jody, you had something?
Just quick feedback on that.
Yeah.
I think as we talk about to publish user-generated content, I think that's hard for. It feels hard for me to get my head around that.
Yeah.
Versus in the context of the conversation we were just having, that was really, really specific about the real world scenarios that keep us up at night.
Yeah.
So just feedback as positioning this one in the questions.
No, that's great. Like I said, I'm very serious that as a pilot program, these were all great questions because I'm going to be going over the video and I'm going to completely rework these questions.
Make sure that it handles not only what the people should be doing, but what they should expect if they file an abuse charge.
Yeah, well, we'll get into abuse reporting, but you're right.
I mean, the procedure needs to cover all of it so that the guidance on it, people understand from the get-go what they can see and what they can't see.
Very good. Thank you. Also has the team provided mechanisms to report inappropriate user names. And again, talking about the type of people who are looking to create a shocking effect, to stir things up, if you will, sometimes to just make things a little worse for everyone else for their own edification. So the guidance is that all public-facing services that allow users to create and upload user-generated content must publish a code of conduct. Oftentimes what you'll see is on a lot of services, you'll see down in the footer, you'll see a link to the terms of use, or you'll see and then you'll see a link to the code of conduct. They also, it's not uncommon now to see a unified code of conduct in terms of use. So there will be a link on the bottom that sometimes I know in the old Windows Live days that just said legal, or it said terms, and you clicked on it and it would take you in, and you would have a link to all of these. But it really is above and beyond the terms of use, because it is the definition of, hey, this is what is acceptable on this site and service. And as Kim mentioned earlier, there are overarching guidelines of here's what you need to cover, but each product group is able to tailor it to a much more specific level of what is acceptable in their product, service, community environment. And you oftentimes have to do that because in one where it's okay to talk about a given, if you have a political forum, it's great to talk about politics. If you have a child's forum, you don't need somebody coming in and going, I hate the governments, because it's like, this isn't relevant. Kids don't need this. So sometimes a code of conduct may say, you need to keep kind of reined in on the topic at hand. Hopefully in a more elegant way than that. It must prohibit inappropriate user-generated content. It must obtain abuse reporting mechanism, and there must be prominent notice of the code of conduct at sign-up. And within the service. So at the point where they are creating their account, where they're actually signing up for it, that's where you have to have a link. Just like you have a link to the privacy statement, because it's generally a privacy-impacting behavior that they're engaging in. That's where you provide a link to the code of conduct. So at that point, it's like you've had this. The notice was there. It's a discoverable notice, but it's available. And then once they're inside it, there has to be a link, usually in the footer, so that people can go back and refer to it. Denise.
In your piece where it says prohibit inappropriate user-generated content, does that also cover removal?
Oh.
So if something gets onto the site,
yeah,
you need to be able to take it off. I'm just going, you say prohibit. To me, that means that that's a proactive step, and you're going to stop it before it gets to the site. But in a lot of cases with a lot of social forums out there, the stuff gets onto the site, and it's a question of actually removing it.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
I'm just saying
fairly noted. In my mind, when I was thinking prohibited, I think, they can put it on. It may be there may be active moderation that stops them from getting it to begin with, or it may be reactive moderation where it gets on there, somebody reports it, and then we go and take it down. But it gives us the right to take it down.
Yeah, this is in a sense, if you think about governance, this is the law, and then there's enforcement. So this is just telling them what is prohibited, whether it's proactively that we go out and search for it or reactive. That's the enforcement side of things. So this is just kind of stating what the appropriate behaviors are.
Yeah. So, and then there's a whole list of prohibited activities. And I'm not going to go ahead and drain these out, but as you can see, they're pretty common. It's pretty, I think, common sense that we generally don't want these kind of things going on the sites and services. So these are the types of things that are the overarching guideline of like your code of conduct needs to address this, and then so that's your baseline that then you then fine tune to so the code of conduct meets the needs of your site. Oh.
One comment. So we released the online safety standards, and then we went through a recent update. And one of the most discussed and debated topics was what should be in the code of conduct. Thank you, Mark. And what was debated was, right now it says prohibited activities, but in reality, what we need to do is say what the code of conduct needs to address, and then it needs to state what's prohibited. So obviously, violence is not prohibited on Xbox, right? So that's where the recent update to the standard allows for a little more flexibility. It says you have to address these types of behavior, and for your service, state what's prohibited, but it doesn't specifically say a lot of what is prohibited.
It's almost like you need to, what you're trying to get businesses to do is to define what's their community standard.
Right,
right?
That's
that
exactly.
Microsoft as a community says, we don't endorse violence, we don't endorse pornography. Ooh. But I think that's really what we're trying to push here, is forcing our business partners to think critically about what their community standards are.
That is correct. So the primary goal is to be upfront with people about what is appropriate on that service, right? There is a secondary goal of, is there something that across the company we think is inappropriate? Obviously, child pornography is something that is inappropriate for any service to have because it's illegal.
Threats of violence, similar, right? So
yes.
Things like that are.
So there are certain, but that is much more debatable. And so that's going to take a longer conversation to determine where do we as a company want to stand, because we serve so many products, or so many different types of consumers and users, so many different markets, that it's hard to say what's appropriate across the entire company. So,
hi, Kim. I think there are some things that we will be able to take a one Microsoft approach to, and we will have to take that one Microsoft approach. But as Jody said, we're really trying to push this down so that the same standards are not going to apply across all products and all services. We're going to have different audiences, different recipients, different constituents, different age groups that they're targeted at. But there are some things that we will definitely be able to take that one Microsoft approach to, and we're in the process now of going through those piece by piece so that we'll be able to roll them out when the time comes.
And I think just for the purpose, for the edification of the people who may be watching this video, to expand more on what Jody said that, you know, what we're really doing is pushing for the businesses to define what's acceptable. And I think Xbox is actually a great example because, as Kim noted, violence is not necessarily prohibited on Xbox. You know, so a lot of the games are violent games. However, the threat of violence is prohibited. So I can play Call of Duty and, you know, say my character is going to kill your character, but I can't tell somebody who I'm playing with, I'm going to hunt you down and kill you. And so I think that's absolutely that's a great point that we'll definitely reflect in the next iteration of this deck because it's great. There. Okay, so as we did before, this is the opportunity to share maybe some experiences that you've had with your communities around the needs for a code of conduct and for things that have come up and how you've dealt with them.
So if anybody's seen examples where sites didn't have a code of conduct and were like, I wish I had one.
Yep. I saw Mark moving towards Jody right away.
I love the sound of my own voice. I can't
well, and
help
I
it.
think
Like,
you know,
I just like to talk.
Xbox is just like this perfect scenario.
So I did a consult for a site called younow.com. And for those of you who aren't familiar with YouNow, you should go look at YouNow. YouNow is many of the things that we, as we're building next-gen technologies, we're trying to implement. You look at YouNow as a service allows children to put real-time video that's linked to their social media profile that has individuals who can text them, and you're seeing the gambit of problems that we have. So a lot of the feedback that we're giving to our partners or potential partners or sites that are doing this is to think about that as it's a great example of how we'd build our services differently, right? So we wouldn't allow unauthenticated users. We want to make sure that if they're moderating and they have a way to flag a moderator to come in and say, look, someone needs to get involved in this right now. We need to look. We're looking at technologies for how do we do video scanning. Because that's really going to be the next big problem we're all going to encounter is live casting, where I'm sending real-time HD video all the time about me. So, a great example of where Microsoft providing some industry leadership here with other partners in the industry.
Yeah. Thanks, Jody. Does anybody else have anything they want to share? Or? Nope? Okay. That was great. Thank you, Jody. So now we'll get into abuse reporting and handling, which so many of these things, as we've seen, are so intertwined. You know, we talked about, like Denise brought up, you know, when you're talking about the code of conduct, well, what about abuse reporting? It's just, it all merges together. So, once again, Litware, once again, their online community. And so, where does our responsibility go to? When we're talking about somebody acting inappropriately, we have to give people the ability to report it so that we can take action against it. So that's, of course, a reactive moderation process, but proactive systems cannot be foolproof. So you want to have both. Again, as we mentioned before, team's super excited. But as it's our job, as I mentioned before, to come in sometimes and be the one to say, okay, there are going to be potentially some problems here. Some people who are looking to cause problems. It's a small subset, and they have a name for them on the internet. And they go by many iterations, many looks and whatnot, but they're internet trolls. There's even definitions of them all over the internet. There's definitions on Urban Dictionary, there's definitions on Wikipedia. It's just these people who just like to cause problems. So to help provide that trusted and safe user experience that we've talked about, as I mentioned, there's multiple forms of moderation. There's a programmatic, proactive type, or there is the notice and consent mechanism, where we're giving people the ability to report to us and say, hey, here's something that got by. Here's something that somebody's doing that I don't like, that I think is inappropriate. And we want to make sure we're responsive to these things. We want to make sure that it's a low lift for people to be able to do these, to make these kind of reports, so that the process can work its way through, so that people can see that action is taken, and so we maintain that level of trust and that sense of safety for the environment. So we're back to the questions format. The last time I got blown away by the questions. I don't think it's probably going to happen again this time based off the knowledge in this room. So, okay, Jody.
Actors.
Yeah.
Like, you know, the state of New York puts out a list of individuals who aren't allowed to engage in online activity, especially if there's minors involved. So we have some people that we know are bad actors, shouldn't be on our service. Are we checking for that?
I didn't even know about that one. That's a very good one. Yeah. Does anybody else have any?
If I see inappropriate behavior or content, is it clear to me how to report it?
Yeah.
There's been abuse reported, but the person who reports it doesn't necessarily get to see what happens to the person that they reported.
Yep.
And they may or may not know that any disciplinary action or at all has taken place. But then again, to reserve the privacy of the person that they reported, they weren't allowed to. So it's kind of like, do I have the right stuff put up there to tell them what to expect once they report?
Yep. We've got a couple people, I think. There was one.
Hi, there's new research coming out of MSR about flagging of content and how people are using it. An example is on YouTube, various Christian groups going around flagging content that has people who are gay or two men or two women, like holding hands or whatnot. And the ability to explain what kind of abuse it is in terms of the flagging, as well as being able to show the history of, well, this was reported as abuse, but it's not abuse. Like a kind of like a history page on Wikipedia. They found that that's really valuable because a lot of people are using the ability to flag as a way to do censorship.
Yeah.
We also have technology where you can rate how effective an individual is at flagging inappropriate content. So if I know that Bob reported 10 things, and 9 of them on follow-up were indeed offensive, Bob has a higher trust score, and we trust his opinion more than Jody, this is his first person that he's complaining about.
That may not be a good choice.
I agree. I think that you are seeing a rise in online griefing where advocacy groups are going after a particular issue and making a lot of noise and causing problems for the groups that they don't agree with. So that trust scoring really helps to turn some of that down.
Yeah, you see that a lot in a lot of online communities where a lot of these aggregators like Reddit or something where they'll use that to downvote something to obscure it or to upvote something to try to bubble it up, and they're gaming the system. And yeah, I'd heard about some systems where they were weighting the value of what people were doing, which I think is great if a product team can make that happen, because obviously you want it to be effective, and by effective doesn't mean that somebody can use it to game the system. Effective means that you take the people, the trolls, and you push them down so that they aren't able to negatively impact the service.
So you call that griefing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. My son says griefing all the time because he plays Minecraft, so that's how I learned the phrase. It was like, griefing, what are you talking about?
We also had a process where if content was not pre-moderated, went live, and someone flagged it as abuse, but then someone looked at it with their eyes and said, no, this is okay, then regardless of what other reports there was, because a valid moderator confirmed that it was fine, that no other abuse reports would come through on it.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, that's great. My questions and answers not nearly as good. So users be able to create or upload user-generated content, and an abuse reporting mechanism must be in place. Who will be performing the moderation? Moderators must be Microsoft employees or under contract. Community members can't be leveraged for moderation. The moderators also must be familiar with the code of conduct in order to be able to perform the role. We've actually seen in the past where teams have tried to leverage just the people that they thought were super users, and they wanted to be able to give them all this power for moderation, and there was no guarantee that these people would even be familiar with the code of conduct or would necessarily apply the code of conduct appropriately. And it's understandable. They were looking for a way to be able to provide moderation when they didn't have the budget to actually hire somebody to do it, but it's not an acceptable way of doing it.
This is an area where we're having conversations with the community because we want to evolve this. We do see that there's opportunities where community members can flag things and in low-risk situations maybe do some moderation, but not, so there are some opportunities, we think, for that community moderation to take place, but trying to figure out how not to give them too much power,
that's
yet leverage them. So
Bob and I, we were on that review together. That was a wet paint super user for fan sites, and that's exactly basically what we did. Is we did have these super fans that could flag things and have them quote unquote removed for the site, but we never would allow content to be deleted permanently because of legal obligations around child pornography reporting. So while we did have super users that had more control over what was displayed or what was at the top of the site because they were super fans as determined by the community, they were given extra special powers, but just not ultimate powers, and anything that was flagged by users was still then moderated on the back end by contracted vendors.
yeah, and I mean it's something like that where they flag it and then if FTE actually looks at it and can flip it back, yeah. So.
Cool. Okay, so the guidance. So as we mentioned, all public-facing servers must have an abuse reporting mechanism. It must file a report with Microsoft. The reason why we call this out is because there have been teams in the past who have looked to have an abuse report go directly to a law enforcement agency or other third party. And of course, that's not an acceptable solution. We need to get it. We need to be able to understand what's going on and be able to take action and moderate against our own products, and services. Christy, did you have a question?
Yeah, sort of. So, did we talk about level of moderation needed depending on things that are pre-moderated versus go live instantly? So, like, I have sites where they're like ad-generated sites with, like, say, Ford and MSN together. And so we have sites that are very driven by the advertiser. So we don't want users to be able to post content that says Ford suck Chevy rules, right? So all of the content, the UGC that's posted, is looked at by a human before it goes onto that site. So the likeliness of anything being illegal or inappropriate or even off-brand is zero, that will be live on there. And because of that strict moderation before anything goes live, we've made it so we don't have the scary big red abuse button, because then at that point we're looking at copyright violations or IP issues. So in those scenarios, because it is so strictly pre-moderated, it's a much less risk level. So in a scenario like that, if somebody doesn't want to have the big scary abuse button, then I'd say, well, you can have everybody look at everything before it goes live. So there is a difference in if something is reactive or proactive moderation.
Yeah.
And so today, in practice, the majority of services do very little pre-moderation. And these standards are really geared towards those services. But Christy is correct, because basically what we're trying to do is mitigate risk here. And if most of the risk is mitigated up front, then, for example, the standard does require that the abuse reporting button say abuse. And a lot of that comes from some conversations in the EU that Jacqueline's more familiar with than I am, where there are regulators who are trying to dictate that, and we're trying to deal with some external expectations. So in the case where you would do pre-moderation, that would be a case where you could say, ask for an exception to say, because I'm doing pre-moderation, instead of saying abuse, I want to say something less, that you can make that request for an exception.
Cool. So then some of the other things is you can't require authentication to file a report. So we don't ever want to have a situation where somebody comes along to one of our sites, and in order to be able to file an abuse report, it's like, oh, well, sign in with your Microsoft account. They should be able to just cleanly file a report. And you also don't want to require the user to submit information in order to make a report. So we can't require them to provide an email address. It doesn't mean you can't provide it as an option, but you can't require them to do it.
Jody's already saying, we need to revisit that one. So let me give a little bit more context. We do want to encourage people to be, because if we know who they are, we can do better investigation and things like that. And also this examples of where people are trying to get somebody to take somebody's content down because it's, they don't like them.
Yeah.
But we do want to make sure that, especially like if it's a child and something inappropriate is being happened, we don't want to put any barriers in between them and telling us something.
I just think prohibit is a strong word, right? I think that we want to maybe talk about best practices or low friction. But if you already have, I don't know, that feels strong for me, and I think it feels like it's limiting as technology evolves. So just something to think about.
Yep.
Yeah, my thought was authentication cannot require.
John.
The issue that I see is the fact that you may have required authentication beyond the site. So how can you say you cannot require authentication in order to report it, because you can't even get to the report?
But some sites is public content. So YouTube, I can just
get
go
that,
look at
but I'm going,
public content.
If your site does require authentication to
Right.
be on it.
Right.
You're already authenticated.
Exactly. So, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we'd have to open up a section that would be totally unauthenticated into that site. So.
No, it really just is to say that if somebody wants to make a complaint but doesn't want to say who they are, we need to give them a channel to do that. But in most cases, most people, if it is a user situation like Xbox, they don't really care about that. But we just don't want to put a barrier in front of somebody that says, you're at a public website, you want to complain about content, and now all of a sudden we're making you create a Microsoft account.
A long time ago, you had to log in with a Windows Live account to report abuse coming from a Hotmail account. So if you got a spam mail or whatever into your Yahoo, you had to go over to Microsoft and then create a Hotmail or Windows Live account to report a Hotmail account into your Yahoo. So that's the kind of thing where it's like,
Yeah.
Probably the genesis of where
Yep. So maybe some better examples of this, and maybe stating it in another way.
I was actually thinking you might want to state it to allow anonymous
Yeah.
reporting.
Yeah. enable. Okay.
Foster. So there's also further requirements that I'm not going to drain, but you can see them coming down. Probably one worth calling out, and we're going to dive into it a little bit, is the third bullet, where moderators must be adequately trained on NCMEC reporting, and we have NCMEC up here, down here, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And that's because, as we mentioned before, with child exploitative issues, we have legal obligations. You can't just take the content down, delete it. And so, it's obviously really important that moderators be fully understanding of what's going on. This is stuff that has come up over the years, where I've done reviews with product teams and helping them understand that, they really have these specific obligations that they have to fulfill, and making sure that they were sharing that information with their product teams, because when you get these reports, you have to do something about them. And then, of course, abuse reporting, there's guidelines for 24 hours where it's parent-child pornography. That has to be acted on right away, 48 hours in all other cases. So let's go ahead and open the floor to see if anybody has any scenarios. I'm got an eye on Jody.
Video uno.
Video uno.
So we're working this problem right now, where with Xbox One, as you can see on as we've revealed it, that we're going to allow users to take game clips that they recorded, add Kinect-generated video to it, and then upload it to our service. And everybody sees it. It's visible. If you're an adult, by default, it's visible to anybody else on the service. So we're building in a kind of a three-tiered model of moderation, where we're going to do 100% moderation of all the video, of all images that are flagged for 60 days. We're also doing on-box filtering, looking for a bad geometry. Yep. And then we also have being able to report it. So we can take down images, we can take down users. We also have Video Uno, where if you've ever played it, don't play it. It's so bad we have a metric, like about the amount of time it takes if you come in with a woman's profile before you see really inappropriate stuff. And so we take users down, we ban consoles. So there's a lot of this out there, and it's going to get worse as you're getting more live casting and streaming video all the time.
Well, I would imagine with the Xbox, with the Kinect one, it's like it's not even just a matter of what the person is doing, but what's going on in the background, because people are going to put stuff up in the background and claim like, oh, I had no idea that.
Well, the problem is technology's not there. We need help from research to go figure out and help us develop. Turning around. We need help from research to help us develop technology. Right now, we can do some filtering on the box. It's a 50% false negative, where we can look at it afterwards, and there's stuff on there that probably shouldn't be there. No, we don't have any. Nobody's really actively working on this problem right now that I know of. Yeah, the problem is that it's the quality of video that's out there and the lighting conditions. And so we don't have good. The industry in general doesn't have a technology that handles this problem, and this is exploding onto the marketplace, and we're going to be behind. Yeah. The other thing, one last thing, we also saw Kinect Share, where when Kinect Share went out, when Kinect first came out, you could share just images. 80% of those images that we sampled that were reported as potentially, we flagged them as being potentially have a problem. 80% were sex acts, guns, drugs. Like that's out there now, and it's getting worse because now it's things we can't scan for. People standing in front of the camera holding send an email to this person or text this person and tell them they're a whatever, right? And that's really hard for us to scan and find online on our own. So,
Jody, have you connected with the team in operations, Mike McCarter's team? I point to Luke because Luke is in operations, not because he's Mike McCarter, but there's a team in the organization that Luke supports that's working on technology for filtering. And if you haven't connected with them yet, we should. So, matchmate.
That was
okay.
great. Fascinating. I mean, to hear the stuff that you guys have got coming down the pike, because
those 80% of those images, so they're forever burned into my retinas.
Yeah, that's got to be, because Because when you were talking about those images, all I could think of is like stuff in the background. Because I think of like if like there's websites and stuff around what they call what is it called, unintentional nudity, I think is what they call it. But you look at some of these things where it's like somebody has a reflection, and you're like, why would you be taking a picture of a tea kettle naked? And it's like that can't be unintentional. But I mean that just seems like a fertile ground.
Another consult for a site where within about 5 minutes, I could find, they were, again, targeted to a younger audience. I could find that person. I knew where they went to school. I knew what they were doing today. I could be outside their school waiting to kidnap them when they got out. And so there's all sorts of stuff in the background that we don't think about that can be used, especially to target children. If you're a bad guy on our service, we've got to be thinking about that.
Yep. Cool. Working at IBM now. Or no, I'm sorry, Intel. All right, well, let's go ahead and move on. So now we're going to get into the subject of child pornography. No more animations, no more funny pictures, because this is obviously a very it's a very challenging subject. It's a very serious matter. It's something that product teams have to understand that they may find themselves running into, and they may have to deal with it. There's just no goodness about this. So, as it says, we're still with Litware. As the online safety manager, whenever people are giving users the opportunity to post any sort of content, and this really goes back to that original one of the puzzle pieces of like any kind you can think of, you have to make them aware of the fact that there is a chance that somebody will come along and either post child pornographic images, store them on there for sharing, post links to them, use them to solicit children, anything else. It's a challenging conversation oftentimes to have with the product team because the product team is like stunned by it. It's the last thing they ever thought of. There's sometimes you go through some of the classic phases of denial and whatnot. Yeah, that's not what we developed for. We have no. It's like, and you have to say, I understand. I realize this is not what you want. What I'm telling you is this may really happen, and when it happens, you have to be prepared for it. You have to have a plan in place so that if you get a report, you can act on it as quickly as possible and take the appropriate steps. It is one of the most disturbing things that product teams have to deal with. As somebody who has actually gone in and investigated some of these things, I can tell you that it is absolutely unpleasant. It is a sight that you don't get out of your head. I don't know. I don't know. Do we have any sort of? Is it in the standard? Okay. It talks about the things that you have to cover and stuff, but. Yep. So we're back to the scenario where they're excited. As I mentioned, it's our responsibility to let them know that there's the very real possibility that somebody may do this. This stuff comes from all over the world and impacts services all over the world. And as I mentioned, it's not uncommon for the teams to absolutely be shocked. Just bringing it up just kind of puts them back on their heels sometimes. And so we have to make sure we handle it with, obviously, in a very serious manner. We find ourselves oftentimes dealing with online safety stuff. There may be a bit of a twisted sense of humor that comes out of it just because of the absurdity sometimes of what we're dealing with. This is one of those ones where we have to make sure we're dealing with it in the appropriate seriousness. As I mentioned, it's important to make sure that they are aware that they have to be adequately prepared, and that when somebody does it, that these are the things we're talking about. So it's not just posting the images. It's using the internet to try to lure children. It's attempting to use the site or service to arrange sex tourism. It's information or content that's connected to molestation, be it within the family or outside of the family. It's sending unsolicited images to children, because sometimes that's a technique that's used to try to groom children. It's using misleading domain names on the internet to trick children into either accepting content or into going to a site. As I mentioned before, it's really important that the team understands they can't delete it. I've consulted with teams before where they were like, oh, we would just delete it. And having to help them understand, you really can't. We have legal obligations. You have to preserve it. We have to be able to report this stuff. Let me see if we have any questions somebody might ask. Denise?
Like if for my particular group, we're pretty much, all enterprise-based. So there's very little of the online safety that really gets us because we're not really public-facing. But if a group created a site that they had service, they were using our service to help maintain their site, like they're using our backup program, or they're using Windows Intune or something like that as a place that people of like minds could go. And they call for support. Happens to be the support personnel has to look at their site to see what's going on and encounters this stuff while doing that.
My understanding is they have a legal obligation to report it.
Right, but are we training our support personnel to understand that?
That I don't know. I'm not sure if we...
That they would properly report it and therefore go down the right path.
That's a really good question. That I don't know. I don't know. Does anybody here know?
I like to talk about everything. No, I don't know the answer.
Don't know the answer? Yeah. I don't know. I've heard of instances where scenarios similar to that have played out, and the people, I've heard of them because they've been reported. But I don't know if there's any formalized process.
Well, one thing that Jacqueline and I have talked about is that this standard right now is talking about online services that we create and the fact that people might post user-generated content. And it doesn't really address what you're talking about here, that there is a broader requirement around reporting child pornography that is kind of outside of the online services space. And your example was a very good one. So but there's another example of retail store. Somebody's helping somebody service a computer that they brought in or whatever and comes across this stuff. So we do need to have a way to we haven't decided whether it's through policy standards and procedures or for training or whatever, to broaden the awareness that you can come across child pornography in other means, and there are still obligations that we have. So that's something that we've recognized as something that we need to get more clarity around, and that hopefully that would lead to our agents being completely trained.
I have a fun scenario. So a lot of times we like to pull feeds from social networking sites like Twitter and Facebook and other public posts. So one of the things to consider is those people that are posting on those services don't see our code of conduct, but yet we're pulling content, about a hashtag or whatever, and then displaying that. A lot of times we're not storing any of the information. We're just pulling APIs and feeds into our sites. So one of the things that the standard doesn't really cover is what are our obligations around that. And a lot of the things that I do work with teams involve making sure that we have filtering in place, using sources that are already curated by other, the Olympics, the official Olympics Twitter feed is curated, things like that. But then reminding the teams that we do have obligation where if something does get displayed on our site, even if it's for a short period of time and we become aware, even if we have limited information such as a user handle or Twitter handle and a hashtag or something like that, that whatever information we have, even if it's limited, we're still obligated to report that. And we need to make sure that we have a way to report that to the right channels.
That's a good point. I mean, and it also shows if you are going to be displaying content or images that were shared through third-party services, you might want to look at what their code of conduct is and what their abuse reporting process is to ensure that, you know, if they're very, they allow a lot and you're pulling it into a site that's more friendly to kids, you might go, you know what, I don't want that service because I've looked at their code of conduct and it doesn't align with what we want in our service.
Or if they're known in the industry, because they don't call Instagram Instaporn for nothing, right?
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know they did, but thank you
didn't
now, I
either.
know.
So I would
Suddenly
also ask
everybody's
them a
on
question
Instagram.
about whether they're using, what's our technology that we scan for known bad images.
Oh, the fingerprinting,
right now.
DNA,
Yeah.
Photo DNA, whether they're using photo DNA, whether they allow users, how they're watching for users that are trying to take conversations online, like watching for the 35-year-old dude asking a 12-year-old, hey, let's Snapchat me, or send me a Wicker message, and getting them off the service into a private forum where they can exploit children.
Yeah. I remember way back in the day when Christy went on the old MSN chat. And what were you, a 12-year-old girl, I think? I think that was her profile. And I never did this, but she relayed the experience, and it was a pretty unsettling.
That was right as we were filling all the tax and last time subscription law, filled it all together.
So back to the questions.
Back to the questions.
I would wonder if the images, who's going to, are the moderators actually trained on this, and do they understand? And do you have a site where, do you have mechanisms in place to kind of store that content, but disable it from being viewed?
Yeah. And one thing you may want to consider is having someone like Global Criminal Compliance handle your moderation of child pornography. Oh, is it CSS Online Safety? My mistake. It used to be Global Criminal Compliance. And
Bob, have you thought about on the training itself, have you thought about putting some relevant regulations here, so to kind of set the context of, hey, 18 U.S. code requires these things, or getting our LCA friends to help us come up with some friendly bullet points around what the regulatory landscape is here. So how do I, for example, capture child pornography, store it temporarily, and transfer it without myself violating the law?
So there is neck handling stuff in the
Standard, yeah.
So here, I've already witnessed here at the company where we have, and I think we need to reinforce that, because you see, for example, people that will get a child pornography image, download it to their local machine, then move it, which I don't believe, we should talk about that, because I think that potentially exposes us versus programmatically transferring it, right?
Yeah.
And having some best practices that say, whenever possible, we use programmatic. Here's our APIs that we publish that allow you to send it, because I know that's in flight too.
So what I'm hearing is that we need a broader awareness of how to handle CP.
Yeah, definitely. I talked to a guy just last week and said, if you were to do it the way you were telling me, you should talk to an attorney, because you're probably going to run
That's part of
afoul.
what I'm doing on online safety review, is I say you do understand that there are very specific requirements that are related to this. So if you're saying that you as a team are going to take this on, did you know that if you forward a link of child pornography, you are violating federal law? So that's something where it's like, here are options of teams that know how to do this and can do it for you.
Exactly.
And if not, you need to have this very robust process that we need to go through with LCA review and get sign-off before you're allowed to own this process yourself.
And that's why I was thinking it'd be so powerful if you start with a brief review of the regulatory landscape here, because a lot of recent cases, one image, even quote unquote accidentally, you're doing 5 years.
So there are high levels of the requirements in the standard, and I don't think it's my job, as I'm not an attorney, so I'm not going to sit there and go through the requirements with them, but I can point out a few things.
It certainly helps them take it more seriously.
Right.
You're not giving them legal advice, but you're...
I think it just can be accomplished in a simple phrase.
Yeah.
Child pornography is contraband.
Right.
So we are at risk when we have it in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
CSS Online Safety is more than equipped and more than credible in terms of how they report. They are reporting between 800 and 1,000 reports to NCMEC per month. And they are probably doing what your respective groups or products or services are handling. So my first piece of advice and guidance would be to go through CSS Online Safety to make sure that the program program is robust.
Yeah, and we'll get this updated to reflect that.
Especially in the marketing, short-term space. So just keep that in mind that it's fiscally and it's just like it's expensive. You have to onboard and tools and things like that, so that's not always going to be reasonable.
We could certainly ask them to help and provide some guidance.
That's a problem that we need a solution to that we don't have one to.
Yeah.
So.
But I always, I mean, of course, back in the day, that was who I sent them to. We'll get that updated to reflect it. But when I was giving guidance to teams, I would make sure that I encourage them to use a service to handle it for them, because I would try to impart upon them how disturbing it is to have to look at this content. And there was more than one team that was like, oh, no, we're fine. And then a couple weeks later, they were like, who are we supposed to contact? Because we don't want to deal with this ever again.
Well, and then you give them the 24-hour SLA on CPM reports.
Yeah.
That means somebody all weekend has to be on point checking it.
Yeah. So it's definitely you help your team understand what's going on. Is the site hosted by a vendor or are we hosting it? Why is it important? It's important to ensure that the vendor handles it properly. Because again, when we're dealing with a third party that's operating on our behalf, sometimes the people that they're hiring may not understand that, again, can't just delete it. So the standard. All products and services allow direct customer to upload and store images. Have to do a risk assessment to determine appropriate child pornography identification processes. Sometimes they use something like photo DNA. There's other scanning tools that have been developed. There's just different methods. Depends on what the risk level is determined. If it's identified, the identification process must be documented and approved by the online safety manager. And the risk level may warrant proactive child identity process, which utilizes scanning technology. So, as I mentioned, it really depends on what the risk level of the service is. Some of them are much higher, and they use a lot of this programmatic stuff like photo DNA and automated scanning and stuff. And others can be more reactive because they don't carry the same level of risk. Yeah. So asking who's providing the risk assessment, the product team, the online safety manager must do the risk assessment with LCA and the risk assessment community, Kim and Jacqueline.
We'll provide deeper procedures on that, but right now it would be working with LCA and TWC.
Yeah.
And if you want a high-level tool, CSS people that do it, they have like a little Excel that you can fill out just to kind of give you an indicator. It's not the final be-all, end-all, but it can give you kind of a risk indicator so you know where you stand.
Yeah. So for the benefit of the people on the video, Christy said that the CSS support teams have an Excel that you can fill out that will help give you a high-level assessment. It's not the be-all and end-all, but it gives you an idea. So the business group must document their process and keep current its child handling practices, if any, to final transfer and destruction of content. And it has to include a list of the personnel responsible for all aspects of content handling. So as Christy mentioned earlier, there's the 24-hour SLA, so somebody is responsible for monitoring and making sure that this stuff is all being handled appropriately. And as Christy noted, a lot of times that's when they're more than happy to offboard the monitoring as well, just because of the issue of dealing with it. The procedure that does following immediately upon discovery, it disables from public view any of the offending content, so links, pictures, video, anything like that. And it also terminates or suspends as appropriate the account associated with the group. So not deletion, blocking it from view, suspending the account, so we're preserving the evidence that's necessary for filing the report, and if prosecution needs to take place for law enforcement, to transfer to law enforcement. The service must report via electronic form any possession of apparent child pornography or other child pornography to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC. It's global.
The NCMEC will transfer to other international authorities and law enforcement agencies. It will start with NCMEC,
Yep.
and
Luckily, they're a clearinghouse, so we don't have to internationally figure out which agency to go to. They have those relationships, so it makes it much simpler for us.
Yeah. And so the report's going to include things like the information about the individual, the historical information, geographic location if possible, the apparent images or links or any other content, and complete communication about the instance. What that really means is you're telling them really the story of how this was discovered and the site and the service and all of that. So they have a full picture so they can take appropriate action. The images shall be promptly deleted upon fulfilling the request from law enforcement. So once law enforcement has come back and said we need this content or whatever they need, after that it needs to be deleted. If nothing is made within a 90-day window, then it's deleted afterwards. So we give law enforcement a 90-day window to come and get any evidence they need from us. After that, if they haven't already done it and we deleted it, we'll get rid of it because we obviously don't want that content on our servers.
And we're required to do that by law. This is actually one of the places where we're talking to them about can we hold it for longer because they're getting so backlogged that they can't get to it in 90 days, but they're requiring us to delete it in 90 days. We're like, well, for your sake, we want to be able to have it for longer, but we don't want to violate the law.
So, understanding the nature of the subject, we're opening it up for anybody to share any experiences, but we totally understand if somebody doesn't quite feel like sharing it. Oh, we'll get there.
Our organization looks at a bunch of sites and links, and occasionally we come across some things that are a little iffy. In one instance, one of our graders came across a site where there was apparent murder for hire, and nobody knew what to do with that.
So this is a third party.
Yes.
So it's not on ours.
Not on our servers. But what kind of obligations do they have for these kind of things?
My recommendation would be to go to LCA.
Yeah.
And
it's
ask
in
them.
another country as well. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
Same for suicide, right? I mean, we have suicide. We have policies
on our service.
Exactly. If someone posts a comment on us and says that I'm killing myself, someone flags it, we actually have escalations that you do go and
So, I mean, I am not a lawyer, but I would say, just like us as individuals could be coming across content that's inappropriate, there's no obligation on an individual's part to report anything. It's just as a company, if we're seeing it on a regular basis, do we want to find some systematic way to be able to do that? And the other question is there somebody in law enforcement who's actually going to be able to act on that content, right? So that's the hard part is, even if we find it,
exactly. What do you do with that?
Yeah.
I think the information about child pornography was very interesting because we also regularly come across that as well. Also on third-party sites. So.
That's interesting. Jacqueline, do you have any thoughts on that? So by nature of their business, they're seeing inappropriate content, in some cases child pornography, on third-party sites that have no relationship to Microsoft at all.
I would point it out to them, but then I would also follow our own procedures and point it out. It's not coming from us per se, but if we know about it and we're not doing anything about it, we could potentially be at risk. So, exactly. So if you see it on somebody else's, you have to call their attention to it, and they might not know what the appropriate reporting procedures are. Then I would also follow our own reporting procedures, even though it's not on our services. Just we've got to flag it for somebody.
So, and if you don't know what that is, we can sit down and we can try and find some process that would work.
We've always reported it to the National Center, but in terms of these other sites, I don't think some of them are private. We don't know who these people are.
How are you coming in contact with it?
Because we grade potential phish and malware, and so we look at lots and lots and lots of sites.
So then okay, we can look up the URL and provide those back.
Yeah, even with the domain name, they can look up and see who the registered owner is, and law enforcement can do a who is. They can actually file a court order to
So
have the
beyond-
information released as far as who's the registrant.
Beyond reporting it to the National Center and
I don't think we would have any obligation beyond that.
We don't, correct. Our obligation rests with the National Center,
Right.
but please know that they need rich reports. You can't just say, well, there's one piece of CP at this address or what have you, because they're going to prioritize that very, very low. They are getting between 15 and 20,000 reports a month. And we want to try to give them rich reports so that they will rise to a level where law enforcement can actually action them. So to the extent that you're able to cull some of that material together, if it's all in fact associated, that would be better. But we do not have to report to law enforcement. Our obligation rests with NECMEC.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Thank you.
So, and then just one last thing on this subject, just to help illustrate. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm telling you, our obligation rests with NECMEC. I want to point out that maybe in terms of a future state, we would look to do some dual reporting, for instance, to the FBI as well as NECMEC, so that we're kind of hitting it from both angles to make sure that our reports are in fact actioned. That is not the procedure to date. The reporting procedure to date is just to handle and go via NECMEC, but I want to just foreshadow that maybe we will take on a little bit more in this regard to be able to, again, up-level the quality and the visibility of our reports. Sorry, Bob.
No, not a problem. So just one more thing I just wanted to help illustrate when we're talking about the type of scenarios that we're dealing with here. You know, it's real easy to think of like, oh, an offensive image, an offensive video, stuff like that. But the people who are doing this sometimes can be, you know, very subtle in how they work. A number of years ago, there was an issue with profile pages. These profile pages, a service that Microsoft was providing, literally just offered the ability to post a picture and have like a brief snippet. And what these people were doing were they would go in there, they would post a picture that they had culled off the internet of a child, and then they would use code words to speak to them. And the product team had come to us when they were talking about their concerns about it. The challenge was that there was nothing that was being done that was it was a violation of any of our policies. Nothing was being said overtly, and it was a challenge for quite a while. There was a blogger over in Europe who was using this to spin up a whole lot of churn against Microsoft. He was using it to basically beat us up in his country of origin. And we finally modified the rules. The product team was able to start actioning against these, was able to investigate them further, and they were shutting these accounts down. But even more, they eventually just discontinued the service. But this ended up spinning into something where the government required Microsoft and a couple of other companies to come and speak to their government, to them about what our moderation processes were. I don't want to get into too many details, but there was a lot of effort that had to be spun up to come up with the answers and the explanation of what was going on. And they went and they found no fault on Microsoft's part. But the point of sharing this is to show that sometimes it's stuff that they can be very good at coming in and staying within the boundaries of what we've set. And so we have to be able to look at these things when they come up and say, okay, how do we adjust to this? How do we modify our what we're moderating against so that we can try to make it a scenario where these people aren't going to get arrested based off what they were doing on our site. But can we make it so that it's the bar is too high for them to engage on our site, and so at least we're keeping them off of our sites and services? In an ideal world, these people would all be spending wonderful time in small cells. But sometimes we can't help facilitate that. So sometimes the best we can do is say, what can we do to make it so that our sites and services are not desirable for them? They're just not easy for them to use. So with that, we come to the conclusion. So thank you very much for attending today. It was a wonderful pilot experience. We got some great feedback, some great information from you. Mark has given you all some surveys to fill out. Please do so. We're really looking to take what we've learned here today, which includes your feedback, and so that we can improve this, make it more useful. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Bob.